It was late in December, somewhere along the Cambodian border, when our battery received an urgent order to move. The radio operator had barely finished copying the message before our platoon leader folded the map, looked at us, and simply said, "We roll now." No speeches, no questions. Every man knew what that meant. An infantry battalion had changed its assault schedule, and if we failed to establish a new firing position before dark, they would attack without artillery support. Back then, I was the number 2 gunner on a 105 mm howitzer. My job sounded simple on paper: load the shells, assist the gun commander, and keep the firing cycle moving. But every round depended on every pair of hands doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Artillery wasn't about heroes. It was about precision, discipline, and trusting the man standing beside you. Our gun crew had 4 men who knew each other better than brothers. Sergeant Wah was our section chief, a quiet man from Nagi and whose calm voice never changed, no matter how close the danger came. If panic ever existed inside him, he never let us see it. 10. Our radio operator was the youngest. He had an old field radio that seemed held together by tape and stubbornness. He joked that if the radio ever died, he'd just yell loud enough for headquarters to hear him. Then there was Dewey, our loader, who carried a dented canteen everywhere. He talked endlessly about the girl waiting for him back home and the wedding they planned after his military service ended. We laughed at him, but secretly we all hoped he'd make it home first. The road to the new position wasn't really a road anymore. Weeks of rain had turned the jungle trail into thick mud that swallowed our boots with every step. We strained against ropes, pushing and pulling the heavy gun through narrow gaps between trees while sweat soaked our uniforms despite the cool evening air. Every few minutes someone would whisper for silence as we listened to the distant sounds of the forest. Night birds, insects, occasionally something larger moving through the brush. None of us spoke louder than necessary. By sunset, we finally reached a small clearing hidden beneath towering trees. It wasn't much, but it gave us enough space to dig a gun pit. We worked with folding shovels until our hands blistered, throwing damp earth over the fresh position and covering the howitzer with camouflage nets. From above, we hoped it would look like nothing more than another patch of jungle. Dinner was the same as most nights: dried rice softened with canteen water. Mine came from the same dented aluminum container I'd carried for months. The rice still tasted like dust, but hunger has a way of improving every meal. As we ate, mosquitoes circled us in clouds, and the familiar ache of malaria lingered in my bones. Some days the fever felt gone. Other days it waited patiently, reminding me it hadn't left. Sergeant Wah spread a worn map across an ammunition crate while Tin adjusted the radio antenna. Grid coordinates, firing tables, elevation data. Everything had to be ready before midnight. Nearby, stacks of artillery shells rested under canvas covers, each one capable of changing the outcome of a battle we could not even see. The strange part was realizing it was New Year's Eve. Back home, families would soon gather around warm meals. Children would wait for fireworks. Parents would pray for peace in the coming year. In our corner of Cambodia, there would be no fireworks. Only artillery. Just as darkness swallowed the jungle, Tin lifted his headset and looked at Sergeant Wah. His expression changed instantly. "The infantry has moved," he said quietly. "They'll begin the assault 3 hours earlier than planned." For a brief second, every man around the gun froze. Then Sergeant Wah folded the map, looked at each of us, and gave the only order that mattered. "Everybody to your stations. We don't have a minute to lose." By the time we settled into the gun pit, the jungle had gone completely black. The kind of black you only know in wartime, not peaceful. Not quiet, but heavy, like it was pressing down on your chest. We kept our voices low and moved by touch more than sight. Every shovel, shell crate, and coil of wire had to be placed exactly where it belonged. In artillery, disorder could kill just as surely as enemy fire. Sergeant Wah knelt over the map with a dim flashlight covered by a strip of red cloth. The light was weak, barely enough to see the grid lines, but any brighter and we risked giving ourselves away. I crouched beside him, holding the firing table flat against the ammo crate while the damp air softened the paper at the edges. Tin sat a few yards away with the field radio between his knees. One hand on the headset, the other tapping the metal case as if that could keep the signal alive. Dewey was stacking shells near the trail, careful to keep them under the canvas. He always worked fast, but never carelessly. Each round was laid with the fuse end facing the same way. Charges separated, tools close at hand. He had a habit of humming when he was nervous. That night, he hummed 2 lines of some love song from home, then stopped when Wah looked up. "Save your singing for your wedding," Wah said. Dewey grinned in the dark. "Then you better keep me alive, Sergeant." Nobody laughed loudly, but all of us smiled, even in that place, with mud in our boots and malaria still burning in our blood. A small joke could warm men better than a blanket. Our mission was simple to say and hard to do. Prepare fire support for 3 infantry movements. First, we would hit the tree line north of the enemy base. Then we would shift fire toward a bunker line marked by our forward observer. Last, if the assault team broke through, we would lift the fire beyond the target so our own troops could enter safely. The problem was the map. It had been copied too many times, folded too many times, and rained on more than once. The grid square for the second target looked clear at first, but when Wah compared it with the coordinates coming over the radio, his fingers stopped moving. He leaned closer. I watched his face change, not fear, not confusion, just that silent alertness of a man who had found something wrong. "Read that again," he told Tin. Tin pressed the headset tighter. Static hissed. Then a broken voice came through. He repeated the coordinates slowly. Wah looked at me. "That creek bend shouldn't be there." I looked down at the map. He was right. The old map showed a dry streambed running east, but the forward observer described a bend to the south. In the jungle, a small mistake on paper could become a disaster in real life. A few hundred yards did not sound like much to people far from war. To us, it could mean dropping shells on the wrong side of the line. We recalculated direction, range, elevation, charge, fuse setting, correction for the slope, correction for the suspected map error. Each number had to be checked twice, sometimes 3 times. My pencil shook a little from fatigue, so I pressed my wrist against the crate to steady it. I remember being ashamed of that small tremor, though no one noticed. Dewey passed around pieces of dried rice from his pocket. Hard, cold, half stale. We chewed in silence. My canteen was bent so badly it would not stand upright, but the water inside tasted like metal and smoke and life itself. Somewhere behind us, a man coughed with the deep, tired sound of fever. Somewhere ahead, the forest made its own noises, branches rubbing, insects screaming, distant movement we could not name. Near midnight, Tin received the final fire request. The infantry was already closer to the target than expected. Wah stared at the numbers we had written. Then he tapped one coordinate with his pencil. "This one is still not right," he said. No one spoke. The first scheduled fire mission was minutes away, and our section chief had just found the kind of mistake that could haunt a man forever. We had no time to check the position the proper way. In training, they taught us to verify everything slowly: map, compass, aiming stake, elevation, charge, fuse, and the forward observer's correction. In the field, especially in Cambodia, war rarely gave you that kind of courtesy. The infantry was already moving through the trees, and our first fire mission was supposed to fall ahead of them within minutes. Sergeant Wah kept his pencil on the map. His face was close to the red-covered flashlight, but his voice stayed low and steady. "Read the target line again," he told Tin. Tin leaned into the radio. Static cracked in his headset. For several seconds, All we heard was the wet breathing of the jungle and the distant thud of something far away, maybe mortar fire. Maybe our own imagination. Then the voice of the forward observer came through broken and thin. 10 repeated what he heard, grid numbers, correction, direction, distance from the creek bend. Wa wrote each number down again. Slower this time. I watched his hand. It did not shake. Mine did. Dewey stood beside the breach with the first shell ready. He had stopped joking. His dented canteen hung from his belt, tapping softly against his thigh whenever he shifted his weight. The shell in his arms looked heavier than usual, though we had handled hundreds like it. That was the strange thing about artillery. A round was just steel and explosive until you understood where it might land. Then it became responsibility. Charge 3? I asked. Wa did not answer right away. He compared the old figure with the new one, then looked toward the dark wall of trees ahead of us, as if he could see through miles of jungle to where our infantry was crawling forward. Not yet, he said. The radio barked again. Headquarters wanted confirmation. The infantry commander wanted fire on schedule. We all understood why. Without our opening rounds, his men would have to cross a killing zone with enemy bunkers still intact. But if our coordinates were wrong, those same rounds could fall short. No man in a gun pit ever forgets that possibility. 10 looked back at us. They're asking if we're ready. Wa closed his eyes for half a second. That was the only sign of pressure I ever saw from him. Then he opened them and said the words none of us expected. Hold fire. 3 minutes. 10 stared at him. Sergeant? Send it. Hold fire 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes felt longer than an entire night. 10 pressed the handset and passed the message. I could hear anger in the reply, though not the words. Somewhere out there, men were moving under the weight of rifles, grenades, and fear. Somewhere, they were counting on us. I wanted to tell Wa we should fire. I wanted to believe the numbers were close enough. But artillery did not forgive close enough. Wa ordered me to recheck elevation. Dewey laid the shell carefully on the mat and helped me swing the tube a fraction to the left. We checked the aiming stakes. We checked the quadrant. We checked the charge. The mud under my knees was cold and slick. Sweat ran down my neck despite the night air. My fever had started again. That deep malaria chill that came from inside the bones. But I forced my eyes to stay on the scale. Then I saw it. 1 digit in the copied coordinate had been written like a 7. But under the red light it was really a 1. On the radio log, the mark was faint, smeared by damp paper and a tired hand. A small mistake. A tiny mistake. Enough to shift the fall of shot toward our own men. I pointed without speaking. Wa leaned in. Dewey bent over my shoulder. For 1 second, the whole war narrowed down to that single number. Wa exhaled slowly. Correct it, he said. New deflection. We moved fast then, but not wild. That was the discipline drilled into us until it became instinct. Dewey lifted the shell again. I set the corrected data. Wa confirmed each step. 10 passed the new fire readiness report through the radio. His voice tight but clear. The order came back almost at once. Fire when ready. Wa looked at us one by one. In the dark, his face seemed older than it had a few minutes before. Now, he said. Dewey rammed the round home. I stepped clear. Wa pulled the lanyard. The howitzer roared, and the jungle lit up for a heartbeat. None of us cheered. We only listened, waiting for the distant impact, praying that 3 minutes of disobedience had saved lives instead of costing them. The first shell left the barrel with a flash that turned the gun pit white for half a second. Then darkness rushed back in, thicker than before. My ears rang. The smell of burned powder filled my nose and mixed with damp soil, sweat, and the old canvas covering the ammunition stacks. No matter how many times I fired a gun, that first round always felt different. It carried our fear with it. We waited for the impact. 1 second, 2, 3. Far ahead, beyond the black wall of trees. The shell landed with a deep, dull thump. A moment later, the forward observer's voice broke through the radio, thin and buried under static. Round over. Impact, 50 short. Correct right. Add 100. 50 short. Those words went through me colder than malaria. Not on our troops, thank God, but close enough to make every man in the pit understand what almost happened. Wah did not curse. He did not blame anyone. He only leaned over the map and repeated the correction. Right correction. Add 100. New data. I adjusted the sight while Dewey prepared the next round. His hands moved fast, but I noticed he wiped his palms on his pants before lifting the shell. That told me he was scared. Dewey could joke through hunger, fever, and rain, but he never joked when a wrong number could kill Vietnamese infantrymen crawling somewhere out there in the dark. Tin pressed the headset tight against one ear and covered the other with his hand. The radio kept fading in and out. Every burst of static sounded like leaves tearing. He had run a wire antenna into the brush, tied it to a branch, then covered the line with mud so it would not shine if flares went up. Still, the signal came and went like a man breathing his last. Fire for effect? He asked. Wah looked at the map, then at the gun. Not yet. One more adjustment. That was Wah, calm enough to disobey pressure, disciplined enough not to waste a round, and responsible enough to know that artillery was not just noise. Each shell had a destination. Each destination had consequences. The second round was loaded. Dewey rammed it home. I stepped back, checked the breech, and nodded. Wah pulled the lanyard. Again the gun bucked. Again the jungle flashed. This time, the observer came back faster. Good line. Drop 50. Target bracketed. Wah finally gave the order we had been waiting for. Battery mission. 3 rounds. Same target. Fire for effect. We had only one gun in that hidden position, but in that moment it felt like the entire war rested on our small crew. Dewey lifted shells from the mat. I said and confirmed. Wah called the rhythm. Tin repeated every message into the radio. Voice rough but steady. The howitzer roared, recoiled, settled, and roared again. Mud shook loose from the wall of the gun pit and fell onto my neck. My arms ached. My fever burned. I forgot all of it. After the third round, there was a sudden pause. Not silence exactly. The forest was never silent, but a break in the fighting. As if the jungle itself had stopped to listen. Then we heard distant automatic fire. A long burst. Then grenades. Then shouting too far away to understand. Tin raised one hand. Observer says bunkers are hit. Infantry moving. No one celebrated. We were too tired, and the night was not over. But I remember Dewey lowering his head for a second, his forehead almost touching the shell crate. Maybe he was praying, maybe just catching his breath. I did not ask. Men in war deserve their private moments. I thought of the number we had corrected. One smeared digit on damp paper. One short pause before firing. In war, people talk about courage as if it is always loud. That night, courage was Wah saying, "Not yet," while everyone demanded fire. It was Tin holding a dying signal together. It was Dewey loading each round as if his own brother was out in front of the target. Then the radio cracked again. New coordinates. The infantry had advanced faster than expected, and our next target was dangerously close to their line. Wah looked at me. "Check everything," he said. "This one has no room for mistakes." The next fire mission came just as the old year was ending. None of us had a watch that worked right anymore, but Tin had kept track of time from the radio schedule. He glanced at the dim face of his cracked wristwatch, then looked at me and whispered, "It's almost New Year." For a moment, nobody answered. Back home, that hour meant lights in the houses, incense on family altars, mothers setting out food, children waiting for the first fireworks. Even poor families tried to make that night feel different from all the other nights. A little sticky rice, a cup of tea, a clean shirt if they had one. My own mother would probably be sitting near the doorway, listening to the village road, pretending she was not waiting for footsteps that might never come. But in our gun pit, New Year's Eve smelled of wet earth, gun oil, sweat, and burned powder. Our clothes were stiff with mud. Our hands were black from handling shells. The only light came from Hoa's covered flashlight and the occasional flash from fighting somewhere ahead of us. There were no fireworks in that jungle. Only artillery. Hua had the new coordinates in front of him. The infantry had pushed closer to the enemy base than expected, which meant our fire had to shift beyond them. We were no longer breaking the first bunker line. Now we were cutting off movement inside the pon pot position, keeping their fighters from reinforcing the gate and the trench line. It sounded simple on the radio. On the map, it looked dangerous. Elevation confirmed, I said. Deflection confirmed, Dewey added, though his voice was rough from smoke. Hua checked the numbers one more time. He always did that, even when shells were waiting, even when headquarters was shouting, even when the whole night seemed to be running ahead of us. He gave every number the respect it deserved. 10 raised his hand. Observer says friendly troops are at the edge of the clearing. Fire must land beyond the inner trench. Hua looked at me. No short rounds. I nodded, though my throat had gone dry. The command came. Dewey lifted the shell. I saw his arms tremble for the first time that night. Not from fear alone. We had been moving, digging, calculating, and firing for hours without rest. Malaria had left him weak the week before, and he had refused to report to the aid station because he did not want to leave the crew short-handed. That was Dewey, always talking about his wedding, always laughing, always carrying more than he should. He rammed the round home. Ready, I said. Hua pulled the lanyard. The gun roared. A red flash tore open the jungle, then vanished. The sound rolled away over the trees toward men we could not see. A few seconds later, the impact came from the direction of the enemy base. Then another sound followed, secondary explosions. Sharper and faster, like ammunition cooking off inside a storage pit. 10 shouted over the radio static. Hit, they say we hit ammo or fuel. Still, nobody cheered. We had learned not to celebrate too early. War had a cruel habit of punishing men who thought a night was almost over. Hua ordered 2 more rounds. Shifted slightly deeper. We fired again. The recoil slammed the gun trail into the mud. Smoke drifted low through the pit. My ears had stopped ringing and had become one long dull hum. When I opened my mouth, I could taste metal. Then, for one strange minute, the radio went quiet. The firing ahead faded. Even the insects seemed to pull back from the noise we had made. In that pause, I became aware of my own breathing. The mud on my knees, the heat of the gun barrel, and the small package of dried rice still tied inside my shirt pocket. I had saved it without knowing why. Maybe some part of me still wanted a New Year's meal. Dewey sat down on an empty shell crate and looked toward the dark sky above the trees. My wife is probably lighting incense now, he said softly. You're not married yet, 10 said. Dewey gave a tired smile. In my head, I am. Even Hua smiled at that, but only for a second. Then the radio cracked alive again, loud enough to make us all flinch. 10 pressed the headset hard against his ear. His face changed. Observer lost visual, he said. Smoke everywhere. They're not sure if the infantry is still clear of the next target. Hoa's smile disappeared. A new fire request came through, urgent and broken by static. We had shells ready. The gun was aimed. The enemy base was still fighting. But now, no one could tell us for certain where our own men were. The worst sound in artillery is not always the enemy shell coming in. Sometimes it is the sound of your own radio dying. 10 kept calling the forward observer, but only static answered. He changed the battery pack, checked the cable, slapped the side of the set with his open palm, then pressed the handset again. Observation post. This is Firebase 3. Say again your last. Say again your last. Nothing. The jungle in front of us was covered in smoke. We could not see the infantry. We could not see the enemy base. We could not even see the sky. The only things clear to me were the wet wall of the gun pit, the hot barrel of our howitzer, and the shells lying under the canvas like sleeping animals. Headquarters came through for a second, angry and broken. Continue, planned fire, repeat, continue. Then the signal vanished. Wah did not answer right away. He stood over the map with both hands pressed on the ammunition crate. The old coordinates, the new correction, the planned fire line, all of it was there in front of him. On paper, we still had a mission. In real life, our infantry had moved faster than expected, and the observer had lost visual. That meant every round from our gun could either save men or cut them down. Dewey looked at me. His face was streaked with mud and powder smoke. A few hours earlier he had joked about his wedding. Now he looked like a man much older than 22. Are we firing? He asked quietly. I did not know. Wah finally spoke. We follow the last confirmed line. No deeper shift. 1 round only. 10 lowered the handset. Sergeant, command said continue planned fire. I heard what command said. Wah replied. I also heard what the observer didn't say. That was all. No argument. No drama. Just a decision made in the dark. With lives hanging on a map nobody fully trusted anymore. We prepared a single round. I checked the deflection twice. Then I checked it again because fear can make a man see what he wants to see. Dewey lifted the shell and waited. His arms were trembling now, but he held it steady. Ready, I said. Wah gave him a long look. Load. Dewey rammed the round home. I stepped back, watching the breech lock shut. Wah pulled the lanyard. The gun fired, and the recoil shoved mud against my boots. We listened for the impact. It landed farther than the last target, but not as far as the planned line. A cautious shot, a soldier's compromise. For a few seconds, there was no answer. Then the radio suddenly cracked. Faint but alive. Firebase 3. Good round, repeat. Good round. Friendly troops clear. Enemy movement to your right, shift right 200. Ten's eyes widened. We've got them. No one smiled. We were too tense for that. But something loosened in my chest. The line was still safe. Our infantry was still moving. The smoke had hidden them, but it had not swallowed them. Wah took the handset himself. Confirm friendly distance. The answer came back weak, full of static, but clear enough. Friendlies holding south edge. Need fire on right trench. Urgent. Wah handed the radio back to 10. Now we fire. After that, we became a machine again. Not heartless, never that, but disciplined. Dewey loaded. I corrected. Wah commanded. 10 repeated the observer's calls until his voice cracked. The gun pit filled with smoke so thick my eyes watered. Dirt rained from the overhead cover each time the howitzer jumped. Between rounds, I heard the forest. Insects. Falling leaves. Distant AK fire. Men shouting somewhere beyond the smoke. I remember thinking how strange it was that a new year could begin like this. No music, no family, no warm meal, just 4 tired men trying to place steel in the right patch of jungle without killing the wrong people. After the 4th round, enemy mortar shells began walking toward us. One burst far left, one closer, one shook loose a chunk of earth from the back wall of the pit. Dewey ducked and cursed under his breath. Wah looked at the map, then at the hot gun. 2 more rounds, he said, then we prepared to move. The mission was not finished, but the enemy had started to find us. The first mortar round landed beyond the trees behind us. The second fell closer, close enough to throw wet dirt over the camouflage net. The third burst somewhere to our left, and for a moment the whole gun pit seemed to jump under my feet. A piece of shrapnel sliced through leaves above us with a sound like someone tearing cloth. Wah did not raise his voice. "Finish the mission," he said. "Then we move." Tin was crouched beside the radio, trying to keep the forward observer's voice alive through the static. His face was pale in the dim light. The wire antenna had slipped from the branch where he tied it, and part of it lay across the mud outside the pit. Every time the signal faded, he looked at that wire the way a drowning man looks at shore. "Right trench still active," he said. "Observer requests 2 more rounds." 2 rounds. That sounded small. People far from war might think 2 artillery shells were nothing compared with a battle. But when your own infantry was close and enemy mortars were finding your position, 2 rounds could become the longest work of your life. Dewey picked up the next shell. He made it halfway to the breach when the pit shook again. Dirt and roots rained down. The shell slipped slightly in his arms. I grabbed the nose before it dropped. He looked at me, embarrassed, almost angry at himself. "I've got it," he said. "You sure?" "I've got it." He rammed it home. I checked the sight, then looked at Wah. "Set." Wah was about to give the firing order when another mortar shell landed just outside the rear wall. The blast slammed me against the side of the pit. For a few seconds there was no sound, only pressure. My mouth filled with grit. When my hearing returned, I heard Tin coughing and Wah shouting something I could not understand. Then I saw Dewey. He was on one knee near the shell mat, holding his left shoulder. Blood was darkening his sleeve. Not a terrible wound by the look of it, but in that place, at that hour, no wound was small. His face had gone gray. I moved toward him without thinking. Wah grabbed my arm. "Check the gun." "Dye's hit." "I see him." "Check the gun." That was the moment I still remember most clearly. Not the firing, not the explosions. That moment, one friend bleeding in the mud, one shell waiting in the breach, one infantry unit ahead of us asking for fire. My whole body wanted to pull Dewey into the deeper part of the shelter. Press cloth against the wound. Tell him he would still go home and marry the girl he talked about every night. But the gun was loaded. If the breach, sight, or trail had shifted from the blast, firing carelessly could send the round anywhere. If we delayed too long, the men at the right trench might be overrun. There was no clean choice. War rarely gives clean choices. It gives you mud, blood, a clock you cannot see, and men depending on you from 2 directions at once. Dewey looked up at me. "Do your job," he said through his teeth. I hated him for saying it. I loved him for it too. I turned back to the gun. My hands moved by training because my mind was somewhere else. Breech locked, sight still true, deflection held, elevation held, trail stable enough. I forced myself to say each word clearly. "Gun safe. Ready." Wah looked at Dewey once, then at me. His face had no softness in it, but his eyes did. "Fire." He pulled the lanyard. The howitzer roared again. The blast pushed smoke across Dye's body, and for one awful second I could not see him. When it cleared, he was still there, jaw tight, alive. Tin shouted from the radio. "Good impact. Enemy trench suppressed. One more if able. One more if able." Wah looked at the wounded man, then at the shells, then toward the jungle where our infantry was still fighting. "Can you load?" he asked Dewey. Dewey tried to stand and failed. I stepped forward. "I'll load." Wah nodded once. I lifted the last shell myself. It felt heavier than any shell I had ever touched. Not because of steel, but because of everything tied to it. Dye's blood, the infantry ahead, the new year we had already lost, and the knowledge that after this round, we still had to get every man and the gun out before the enemy walked their mortars onto us. I rammed it home. Tin covered Dye's wound with a field dressing while keeping one hand on the radio. Wah gave the final command. We fired. The jungle answered with fire, shouting, and then a brief, broken message from the observer. Target down. Move your gun. Move now. Move your gun. Move now. Those words came through the radio broken by static, but none of us needed them repeated. Enemy mortars had found the edge of our position. If we stayed another 5 minutes, they would walk the next rounds right into the gun pit. Wah folded the map in one hard motion and shoved it into his chest pocket. Clear the breach. Pack the site. Leave anything we don't need. That hurt to hear. Artillerymen hate leaving equipment behind. Every tool has a purpose. Every crate, every charge bag, every piece of canvas. But a dead crew cannot fire another mission. That was one of the first lessons war teaches, and one of the hardest to accept. I opened the breech and checked the tube. Empty, hot, but safe. My hands moved fast, though my body felt slow and heavy. Smoke still hung in the pit. My ears rang. The fever chill had returned, crawling up my spine under my wet uniform. I wanted water, but when I grabbed my canteen, it was nearly empty. The dented aluminum body had been crushed flatter during the blast, and the last mouthful tasted like mud. Tin was still on the radio, trying to confirm the infantry's status. He had blood on his cheek from a small cut, but he ignored it. Say again. Did they break through? Say again. The answer came in pieces. Gate cleared. Trench line broken, enemy falling back. Then static swallowed the rest. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe. The base had not fully fallen yet, but the worst point had cracked. Our rounds had hit the right trench, and the infantry had used that narrow window to push through. I looked toward Dewey, who was sitting against the wall with a field dressing pressed to his shoulder. "You hear that?" I asked. He nodded. His lips were pale, but he managed a tired smile. "Then I loaded well." "You loaded like a mule," Tin said, trying to sound light. Dewey closed his eyes. "A handsome mule." Even Wah almost laughed. Almost. Another mortar round landed close enough to shake the gun shield. That ended the moment. We went back to work. Moving a howitzer in darkness, under fire, with one man wounded, is not a clean thing. It is ropes slipping through bloody hands, boots sinking in mud, whispered curses, and men pushing with whatever strength they have left. We pulled off the camouflage net, kicked dirt over the fresh shell marks, gathered the sight, firing table, radio, and remaining rounds. Anything that could identify the position had to be buried, dragged away, or destroyed. Wah assigned each of us without wasting words. Tin would carry the radio and keep the wire from snagging. I would help limber the gun and take Dai's place on the trail. Wah would guide the movement by compass and memory. Dewey was supposed to stay low until we could get him on a stretcher. But when I turned around, he was trying to stand. "Sit down," I snapped. He looked ashamed, not because he was wounded, but because he could not help. That is something civilians may not understand. In war, pain is one thing. Feeling useless beside your friends is worse. Wah knelt in front of him. "You did your part, now let us do ours." Dewey looked away. We got the gun out of the pit by inches. Mud sucked at the wheels. Twice, the trail dug in and we had to lift together while Tin pulled from the front. My arms burned so badly I thought they would tear loose. Behind us, enemy fire kept searching the trees. Each explosion pushed us harder. Then, from the direction of the base, a new sound rose. Scattered enemy fire. No longer steady, no longer organized. The pon pot position was breaking. I remember standing there for 1 second, hands on the wheel, covered in mud, hearing that change. It was not victory like in songs. It was tired, ugly, expensive. Somewhere ahead, infantrymen were bleeding. Somewhere behind us, Dewey was gritting his teeth so he would not cry out. And in the middle of it all, our little gun crew had done exactly what artillerymen are supposed to do: fire accurately, protect our own, and move before the enemy could bury us. Wah pointed into the trees. Forward, he said, no stopping until the next cover line. So we pulled the gun into the dark, leaving behind a smoking pit where the new year had begun without a single firework. We pulled the gun until my hands no longer felt like hands. They were just two pieces of meat wrapped around a wet rope. The trail was narrow, black, and slick with mud. Every few yards the wheels sank, and we had to throw our shoulders against the carriage to free them. The howitzer that had felt like our strength all night now felt like an iron animal trying to drag us back into the fire. Behind us, the abandoned gun pit disappeared into smoke and jungle. I looked back once and saw the camouflage net hanging loose from a broken branch. For some reason, that sight hurt me. We had dug that position with blistered hands. We had measured from it, fired from it, feared from it. Now we were leaving it like a man leaves a house that has caught fire. Wah noticed me looking. Eyes forward, he said. He was right. In the dark, one wrong step could break an ankle or tip the gun into a ditch. We moved without lamps, guided only by Hoa's compass and Tin's memory of the trail. The radio was strapped to Tin's back now, antenna wire coiled around his shoulder. Every few minutes he stopped, listened, and whispered what he could hear from headquarters. Most of it was static. Some of it was shouting. None of it made the night easier. Dewey was carried behind us on a poncho tied between two poles by a pair of infantrymen who had come back from the edge of the clearing. He kept trying to sit up and tell them he could walk. Finally, one of them told him to shut up or he would drop him in the mud. Dewey laughed once, then groaned from the pain. That laugh stayed with me. The base behind us was still burning in places. Not a big fire like in the movies. Just low orange flashes through the trees and smoke drifting with the morning wind. The Pon Pot fighters were pulling back in small groups, firing as they moved. Our infantry was inside the outer trench line by then, but the cost was beginning to show. Men passed us in the opposite direction, some walking, some leaning on friends, some silent on stretchers. No one asked who had won. In war, victory often walks past you bleeding. We reached the next cover line just before the sky began to pale. It was not dawn yet, only that gray hour when the jungle stops belonging to the night but has not given itself to morning. Wah ordered us to set the gun under a stand of thick trees. We did not dig a full position. We only hid the wheels, covered the barrel, and scattered branches over the tracks. If enemy scouts followed, we needed to look like nothing had passed. Tin finally got a clear message. The enemy base had been broken. The infantry had taken the main trench and destroyed the ammunition pit our rounds had struck. Several bunkers were still being cleared, but the position could no longer hold. Headquarters called it a success. No one in our crew said anything for a long time. Wah sat on an ammunition crate and cleaned mud from his compass with the corner of his sleeve. Tin leaned against a tree, eyes closed, the radio still hissing beside him. I crouched near the gunwheel and tried to open a packet of dried rice. But my fingers would not obey. They kept shaking, not from fear anymore, from exhaustion, fever, and the emptiness that comes after surviving something you were not sure you would survive. Dewey was laid beside us. The medic had stopped the bleeding, but his shoulder was swollen and his face looked drained. He opened one eye when I knelt near him. "Did we miss New Year?" he asked. I looked at the gray sky. "Yeah," I said, "we missed it." He smiled faintly. "Then tell my future wife I was busy." I wanted to laugh, but my throat tightened instead. Later, someone brought tea in a blackened can. It tasted of smoke and leaves. We passed it around without ceremony. That was our New Year's meal: bitter tea, cold dried rice, and the knowledge that some men who had started the night with us would not see the morning. I looked at our gun, half hidden under branches, mud packed around the wheels, barrel still warm from firing. I had thought artillery was about distance, men far from the target, firing at things they could not see. That morning I understood it differently. Every shell had carried us with it. Every correction had tied us to the infantry crawling ahead. Every delay, every decision, every number had left a mark on somebody's life. Wa stood and gave the quietest order of the night. Rest while you can. So we rested beside the gun before sunrise, too tired to speak, while the first morning of the new year came over a battlefield that had no reason to feel new. Many years have passed since that New Year's night in Cambodia, but I still cannot hear fireworks without thinking of artillery. People around me smile when the sky lights up. Children clap. Families count down together. I smile too, because peace deserves to be celebrated. But somewhere inside me, another sound always rises first. The deep crack of our 105mm gun. The slap of recoil in wet mud. Tin shouting into a dying radio. Wa saying, "Check everything." And Dewey gritting his teeth with blood on his sleeve. After that battle, we stayed near the captured base for 2 more days. The infantry cleared the last bunkers. We moved our gun twice more. Always under trees. Always hiding the tracks. Always ready in case the Pol Pot fighters tried to return. The reports said the enemy position had been destroyed. On paper, it was a successful mission. On the ground, success looked different. It looked like empty shell crates, torn ponchos, tired medics, and young men staring at nothing while pretending they were only resting. Dewey survived. The wound damaged his shoulder badly enough that he was sent back for treatment weeks later. Before he left, he gave me his dented canteen. He said it had become useless because it leaked from the seam. But I knew better. He did not want to carry that night home alone. He wanted someone else to remember it with him. "Keep it," he told me. "When I get married, you bring it back and fill it with rice wine." I promised I would. I never got the chance. After the war, I heard he did marry the girl he had talked about in the gun pit. Then life carried us in different directions. As it does with soldiers once the uniforms are put away. Letters came slowly, then not at all. I do not know where he is now. Sometimes I imagine him as an old man with one stiff shoulder, sitting in front of his house while grandchildren run around him. I hope that is true. Tin became a teacher, or so I was told. That made sense to me. Even in the worst static, he had a way of listening carefully, separating noise from meaning. Wa remained in the army longer than the rest of us. The last time I saw him, his hair had begun to gray, but his voice was the same, quiet, steady, impossible to hurry. He handed me a chipped artillery sight scale wrapped in cloth. "You checked this well that night," he said. I wanted to say something important, something worthy of the men we had been and the men we had lost. But I only nodded. Soldiers are often poor with words when the heart is too full. I keep that chipped sight scale and Dai's dented canteen in a wooden box at home. My grandchildren once asked why I kept broken things. I told them they were not broken to me. They were proof that a small number on a wet map can matter. Proof that discipline is not coldness. Proof that men can be afraid and still do their duty. Proof that friendship, once forged in mud and danger, does not end simply because a war ends. Every New Year's Eve, after the family meal, I sometimes open that box. I touch the cold metal of the sight scale and the bent body of the canteen. I remember the smell of damp earth, the taste of dried rice, the fever in my bones, the shells under canvas, and the jungle waiting in the dark. That was our Gao Thua without fireworks. No bright colors in the sky. No music. No easy prayers. Only 4 artillerymen in a hidden gun pit, trying to protect men they could not see, paying for every round with fear, calculation, and love for one another. And even now, when the world outside my window explodes with celebration, I still hear Hoa's voice before every burst of light. "Check everything. This one has no room for mistakes."